Before we even start, understand this. People didn't just get hurt in this story. People spoke and then disappeared. Names surfaced, told their truth, and then went silent. And once you notice that pattern, you can't unsee it. Because this isn't about one man anymore. It's about a system and the people who knew exactly how it worked. It becomes almost unsettling when you truly pause and start counting the names. One by one, familiar figures emerge, people tied directly or indirectly to Diddy's party world, now standing loudly and unapologetically behind Kamala. This isn't subtle support whispered behind closed doors or carefully worded neutrality. It's bold, public, full-throated endorsement. No hesitation, no distancing. And for many observers, that sudden moral clarity sparks an unavoidable comparison. Because these same voices, now so confident when speaking about danger, ethics, and accountability, were conspicuously silent when the stakes were arguably just as high. That silence lingers, raising questions that no endorsement can easily erase. And then there is Jennifer Lopez, Diddy's former girlfriend, a woman who didn't just know him in passing, but stood right beside him during some of the most controversial and defining moments of his life. Today, she presents herself as a warning voice, urging the public to be cautious, to be vigilant, to fear Donald Trump. That is the precise moment when many people stop, not because she is speaking, but because of when she is speaking and about whom. The question surfaces almost instinctively: how many warnings did she ever give about Diddy? The answer is uncomfortable in its simplicity. None, no interviews, no subtle hints, no coded concern, no retrospective reflection. Not then, not later. And so, when she speaks now, people aren't merely listening, they're calculating. They're weighing proximity against silence, access against inaction, and asking whether moral authority can truly survive selective memory. Especially when this discussion drifts dangerously close to another name that never seems far from conversations like this: Epstein. Between Diddy and Epstein, many believe there exists a shadow archive. Thousands of hours of footage, countless private rooms, private jets, secluded islands, and sealed-off spaces never meant to see the light of day. Years ago, Elon Musk casually suggested that Diddy's relationships and inner world were far less clean than they appeared on the surface. At the time, the comment barely landed. It was dismissed as provocation, shrugged off as noise, scrolled past like so many other internet provocations. But now that remark feels different. Less like trolling, more like foreshadowing, because suddenly there is talk, quiet, uneasy talk of lists circulating behind the scenes, names whispered, not announced. And when those whispers began, something unmistakable followed. The industry fell silent, not outrage, not public denial, just absence. A heavy, deliberate quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't feel accidental. The kind that sounds like the same internal alarm, ringing in 1,000 different rooms at once. And in the center of that silence, one name continues to surface, refusing to stay buried. Kim Porter, not a distant acquaintance, not a party attendee, but the woman closest to Diddy for years, his longtime partner, the mother of his children, a person with complete access, complete visibility. Kim wasn't operating on rumors or second-hand accounts filtered through outsiders. She was inside, fully inside. That's why her name never fades from the conversation. Because when you are that close, you don't just witness moments, you understand systems. You see how power moves, how deals are brokered, how rooms are controlled, how people are positioned, how patterns repeat, how boundaries erode, and how the machine continues running long after the doors close and the music fades. That proximity is also why many people never fully accepted the official explanation for her death. The public was told it was pneumonia. Straightforward, clean, case closed. But for those who had been paying attention, it never felt resolved. Kim didn't appear to be declining. She was active, visible, engaged, living like someone with plans, momentum, and a future still unfolding. There was no long public illness, no gradual withdrawal, no narrative of deterioration. And then suddenly she was gone. That abruptness is where doubt began to settle. Quiet at first, then persistent. And that doubt is exactly where Jaguar Wright stepped in, loudly, defiantly, and without apology, challenging the version of events many were told to accept without question. It becomes almost unsettling when you truly pause and start counting the names. One by one, familiar figures emerge, people tied directly or indirectly to Diddy's party world, now standing loudly and unapologetically behind Kamala. This isn't subtle support whispered behind closed doors or carefully worded neutrality. It's bold, public, full-throated endorsement. No hesitation, no distancing. And for many observers, that sudden moral clarity sparks an unavoidable comparison. Because these same voices, now so confident when speaking about danger, ethics, and accountability, were conspicuously silent when the stakes were arguably just as high. That silence lingers, raising questions that no endorsement can easily erase. And then there is Jennifer Lopez, Diddy's former girlfriend, a woman who didn't just know him in passing but stood right beside him during some of the most controversial and defining moments of his life. Today, she presents herself as a warning voice, urging the public to be cautious, to be vigilant, to fear Donald Trump. That is the precise moment when many people stop, not because she is speaking, but because of when she is speaking and about whom. The question surfaces almost instinctively. How many warnings did she ever give about Diddy? The answer is uncomfortable in its simplicity. None. No interviews, no subtle hints, no coded concern, no retrospective reflection. Not then, not later. And so when she speaks now, people aren't merely listening, they're calculating. They're weighing proximity against silence, access against inaction, and asking whether moral authority can truly survive selective memory. Especially when this discussion drifts dangerously close to another name that never seems far from conversations like this: Epstein. Between Diddy and Epstein, many believe there exists a shadow archive. Thousands of hours of footage, countless private rooms, private jets, secluded islands, and sealed-off spaces never meant to see the light of day. Years ago, Elon Musk casually suggested that Diddy's relationships and inner world were far less clean than they appeared on the surface. At the time, the comment barely landed. It was dismissed as provocation, shrugged off as noise, scrolled past like so many other internet provocations. But now that remark feels different. Less like trolling, more like foreshadowing, because suddenly there is talk, quiet, uneasy talk of lists circulating behind the scenes, names whispered, not announced. And when those whispers began, something unmistakable followed. The industry fell silent, not outrage, not public denial, just absence. A heavy, deliberate quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't feel accidental. The kind that sounds like the same internal alarm, ringing in 1,000 different rooms at once. And in the center of that silence, one name continues to surface, refusing to stay buried. Kim Porter, not a distant acquaintance, not a party attendee, but the woman closest to Diddy for years, his longtime partner, the mother of his children, a person with complete access, complete visibility. Kim wasn't operating on rumors or second-hand accounts filtered through outsiders. She was inside, fully inside. That's why her name never fades from the conversation. Because when you are that close, you don't just witness moments, you understand systems. You see how power moves, how deals are brokered, how rooms are controlled, how people are positioned, how patterns repeat, how boundaries erode, and how the machine continues running long after the doors close and the music fades. That proximity is also why many people never fully accepted the official explanation for her death. The public was told it was pneumonia. Straightforward, clean, case closed. But for those who had been paying attention, it never felt resolved. Kim didn't appear to be declining. She was active, visible, engaged, living like someone with plans, momentum, and a future still unfolding. There was no long public illness, no gradual withdrawal, no narrative of deterioration. And then suddenly she was gone. That abruptness is where doubt began to settle. Quiet at first, then persistent. And that doubt is exactly where Jaguar Wright stepped in, loudly, defiantly, and without apology, challenging the version of events many were told to accept without question. Jaguar Wright has alleged that Kim Porter knew far more than the public was ever meant to believe, that she wasn't just a witness to events, but a keeper of knowledge that could have altered reputations, careers, and power structures. According to Jaguar, Kim was working on a book, preparing to speak, not out of bitterness, not for gossip, and not for attention, but to put the truth on the table in her own words. While the official cause of death was listed as pneumonia, Jaguar has repeatedly claimed that an early coroner's report classified Kim's death as a homicide, alleging that toxins were found in her system. She has explained that certain poisons can be virtually undetectable without targeted testing, capable of mimicking heart attacks or respiratory failure and producing deaths that appear natural on paper. What made people pause wasn't merely the gravity of the allegation, it was Jaguar's posture. She did not hedge her words, she did not soften her claims. She did not retreat when challenged. Instead, she openly dared powerful people to sue her. She welcomed discovery. She invited scrutiny. And that kind of confidence doesn't usually come from speculation. It comes from the belief that you know something others are desperate to keep buried. If Kim truly was preparing to expose what she had seen behind closed doors, she would not have been a threat to just one individual. She would have been a liability to an entire ecosystem, an interlocking system built on silence, loyalty, favors, and mutual protection. That realization shifts the scope of the conversation dramatically. Because when the danger isn't isolated to a single person, the motive becomes collective. From there, attention inevitably swings back to Jennifer Lopez, because her proximity to that world was never theoretical or exaggerated. It was documented, photographed, and testified to. Despite attempts to downplay her involvement during that era, she was not operating from the sidelines. She was present during one of the most pivotal and explosive moments associated with Diddy's name, the 1999 nightclub shooting. That night was not just chaos or bad luck. It was a dividing line. A woman was shot. Shine went to prison and served time, and Jennifer Lopez walked away untouched, her career uninterrupted. But the details of that night never fully disappeared. The woman who was shot later stated that she saw Diddy pull the trigger, not Shine. And Shine himself has since spoken publicly, describing how young, ambitious, and fiercely loyal he was at the time, willing to protect Diddy at his own expense. He has recounted feeling used, then discarded, explaining how narratives shifted, witnesses were contacted, and stories evolved in ways that ultimately left him holding the weight of the consequences alone. That context matters because it reframes loyalty not as something reciprocal, but as something conditional, temporary, transactional, and ultimately expendable when power is at stake. Layered on top of everything else are the long-circulating rumors that Jennifer Lopez allegedly handed the weapon back to Diddy after the nightclub incident. These claims have never fully disappeared, even as time passed and public attention shifted elsewhere. What makes them linger is not just the rumor itself, but the undeniable fact that Jennifer wasn't hearing about the situation secondhand. She was physically present. She was close enough to testify. That distinction changes everything. This wasn't distant association or accidental overlap. It was being inside the chaos while it was unfolding in real time, surrounded by flashing lights, panic, and irreversible consequences. And now, as broader conversations emerge about Diddy's alleged lifestyle and the culture that surrounded him for years, questions people once avoided now demand answers. What did Jennifer actually witness during those moments when the world outside was shut out? What did those parties truly look like beyond the carefully curated images released to the public? How reckless did things become once the doors were locked, the cameras were gone, and only the inner circle remained? And if she saw behavior that crossed moral or legal lines, why did she never speak? Neither then, when silence carried immediate consequences, nor later, when distance might have offered protection. That unease only intensified when Elon Musk made a pointed public comment that echoed what many had been thinking quietly for years. His remark essentially distilled the discomfort into a single idea: proximity carries responsibility, and silence in the presence of wrongdoing raises serious questions. It wasn't an accusation wrapped in legal language, it was a cultural gut punch. And with that one comment, wounds people assumed were long buried were torn back open. Old footage resurfaced. Old interviews were re-examined. Past decisions were reinterpreted through a new lens. What once felt like history suddenly felt unfinished, unresolved, and uncomfortably relevant again. Then comes Cassie, and this is where the narrative fundamentally changes shape. Until this point, much of the conversation lived in rumors, speculation, and fragmented accounts. Cassie altered that entirely. She didn't tease revelations. She didn't rely on innuendo. She filed a lawsuit. In stark, formal language, she laid out allegations describing years of control, coercion, intimidation, and psychological manipulation. Her account didn't portray a chaotic or volatile relationship fueled by impulsive behavior. Instead, it described a system, structured, deliberate, and sustained over time. A system reinforced through money, fear, isolation, and silence, where power dictated the rules and resistance carried consequences. Inside the courtroom, her testimony was reportedly graphic, raw, and emotionally devastating. She broke down as she spoke, struggling under the weight of memories she said had followed her for years. She described feelings of anger, humiliation, and repeated sexual encounters that she alleged left her feeling degraded and stripped of autonomy. She spoke about being controlled, monitored, and pressured into situations she did not feel free to refuse. She described the so-called freak-offs in detail, not as spontaneous indulgences, but as orchestrated events that revolved around dominance and compliance. And then a critical shift occurred. Male escorts independently came forward, corroborating key elements of her account. Their testimonies aligned in tone, structure, and detail. In that moment, the narrative expanded beyond a single voice. It stopped being one woman's allegation standing alone and became a broader pattern supported by multiple perspectives, each reinforcing the same disturbing framework. One escort described an atmosphere that felt deeply uncomfortable from the start, a dynamic that stripped intimacy of anything personal and transformed it into something controlled and transactional. According to his account, Diddy was not merely present but actively watching, directing, and managing the environment. He allegedly dictated who participated, when they entered, and how the situation unfolded, turning what might appear on the surface as consensual encounters into something orchestrated and unsettling. Another escort testified that he was explicitly instructed not to look at Diddy, not to acknowledge him, and not to interact with him in any way. What made that detail especially disturbing was the claim that those instructions came directly from Cassie herself. Outsiders, people with no personal loyalty to any side, began confirming pieces of the same pattern. Separate voices, similar structures, repeating behaviors, and that is where the conversation becomes more complicated, more uncomfortable, and far less black and white. Some believe Cassie knows more than she has ever said publicly, that she was inside this world long enough to understand how the machine functioned, how rules were enforced, and how consequences were delivered. There is a growing belief that early on she may have been forced to facilitate certain situations, not out of desire or agency, but out of survival. Power structures like this do not rely on constant violence, they rely on conditioning. Fear reshapes behavior. Compliance becomes a coping mechanism. Over time, people adapt not because they agree, but because resistance feels dangerous. That is how toxic systems sustain themselves, not through chaos, but through quiet control. It has been widely reported that Diddy settled Cassie's lawsuit for approximately $20 million. That settlement does not erase what she alleges she endured, nor does it answer the deeper questions her case raised. Instead, it intensifies them. Because the question that refuses to go away is simple and unsettling. How deep does this go, and how much money does it take to keep a story contained? Once that settlement became public, attention shifted rapidly to others still standing close. The spotlight moved to young Miami. As lawsuits stacked up and public opinion began to turn, she didn't step back or create distance, she doubled down. 10 toes planted. She wrote a letter to the judge describing Diddy as loving, supportive, and transformed, claiming he was in therapy and actively working on his anger. Online reaction was swift and skeptical. Many didn't see loyalty, they saw dependence, private jets, luxury gifts. A lifestyle sustained by proximity to power rather than independence. Then came claims that young Miami was allegedly present at some of the same parties Cassie had described, events marked by the same aesthetics, the same inner circle signals, the same restricted access. And once a ship starts taking on water, anyone still defending the captain risks being dragged down with it. That shift naturally brought attention to Paris Hilton. Not a romantic partner, but undeniably embedded in the same party ecosystem. Over the years, people have attempted to rewrite that history, suggesting she simply stopped by for appearances and left early. But receipts suggest otherwise. White parties, birthday celebrations, private events where access was limited and curated. Paris had praised those gatherings publicly, calling them unforgettable and describing Diddy as having a heart of gold. In hindsight, that praise aged poorly. As insiders began to describe what allegedly took place behind closed doors at those events, an uncomfortable question resurfaced. Did Paris simply dance and leave, or did she witness things that should have made anyone step back? Silence from someone with that level of visibility does not read as neutral. To many observers, it reads as protective. Then there is Ellen DeGeneres. When the scandal surrounding Diddy began to intensify, Ellen didn't issue statements, conduct damage control, or attempt to contextualize past associations. She went quiet, she packed up, and she moved to England. Officially, the explanation was simple: stress, burnout, a desire for peace, a need to step away from the noise. But street talk used a different word altogether: panic. Diddy had been a frequent guest on her show. They joked openly on air about his parties, his after-parties, and the exclusive world that surrounded him. At the time, it all played as lighthearted banter. In hindsight, those old clips feel different, heavier, more uncomfortable, charged with implications no one wanted to examine then. And when Ellen disappeared almost entirely from the public eye, especially following the death of Twitch, officially ruled a suicide, the internet did what it always does. It began connecting dots. Speculation, of course, is not evidence. But timelines matter, patterns matter, and perception is shaped by who leaves early and who stays behind. Many believe Ellen stepped away before the blast radius expanded, choosing distance over explanation. Another name that consistently resurfaces whenever conversations about Diddy begin overlapping with Epstein is Naomi Campbell. For years, whispers followed her quietly, never quite breaking into mainstream confrontation. Recently, though, the volume has increased. Naomi is often framed not simply as a guest or bystander, but as someone who allegedly knew how the rooms worked, who knew which doors opened where, who belonged inside them, and how to connect people across elite spaces. Street narratives claim she facilitated access. Introductions, private trips, exclusive gatherings where status mattered more than transparency. Online, harsher labels circulate, suggesting she remained protected precisely because her career never stalled, never slowed, never faced the kind of interruption that often follows proximity to scandal. Naomi has acknowledged crossing paths with Epstein while firmly denying any knowledge of his crimes. For some, that explanation is sufficient. For others, it isn't, especially as old associations were quietly scrubbed once Diddy's scandal erupted. When someone cleans up proximity that quickly, people don't just notice. They ask why. Then there is Janice Combs, Diddy's mother, publicly unwavering, loyal, seated front row in court. To some, she represents nothing more than a mother standing by her son. But street narratives complicate that image. They suggest she didn't just raise him, she shaped him. That she played a role in how he learned power, charm, influence, and control. Old clips have resurfaced in recent months, moments once dismissed as eccentric or harmless now re-examined through a far more critical lens. Lip kissing. Matching nail polish. IV drip videos shared casually. Rewatched today, many say those moments feel unsettling, as if boundaries were blurred in ways people didn't question at the time. Some allege, strictly as allegations, that Janice understood the freak-off culture well enough to protect it, not as a participant, but as a shield. As someone who knew how to insulate, deflect, and normalize behavior that others might have challenged. That raises an uncomfortable question. Was she simply a mother defending her son at all costs, or was she part of the system that helped make him untouchable for so long? Then there is Gina. Her story is one of the clearest examples of how voices surface, and then suddenly disappear. Gina wasn't a distant rumor or a name pulled from speculation. She dated Diddy. She moved within the same rooms Cassie occupied. She alleged abuse that followed a familiar pattern: monitoring, control, emotional punishment, and physical intimidation. According to Gina, Cassie herself warned her plainly, urgently, that this was not a man to take lightly, that he was dangerous. That warning alone has never stopped echoing because it suggests continuity, not coincidence. And then, almost as quickly as Gina spoke, she went quiet. Interviews stopped. Posts disappeared. Her presence faded. Street talk says the pressure intensified. NDAs slid across tables. Legal threats whispered through intermediaries. Doors quietly closing. Behind her, industry freeze-outs don't announce themselves. They just happen. And most people don't believe Gina lied. They believe she got scared. Because backing away from that world doesn't come free. It comes with consequences that most people never see, but everyone inside understands. Next comes Miss A. Hilton, a name that carries weight for a very different reason. Blueprint era, early empire days, before the mythology, before the untouchable image calcified. Miss A wasn't just adjacent, she was foundational. The mother of Diddy's son, one of the architects of the bad boy aesthetic when the brand was still being built brick by brick. She saw the origin story, the early playbook. How loyalty was enforced, how charm was weaponized, how power was structured long before it became public spectacle. That's why her response, or lack of one, when Cassie filed her lawsuit mattered so much. Miss A didn't rush to defend Diddy, she didn't posture, she didn't attack Cassie or attempt to control the narrative. Instead, she quietly supported Cassie, respectfully, without noise, without performance, and that silence spoke volumes. Many interpret it as the posture of someone who got out early, before alleged wild nights stopped looking like excess and started resembling a system. And then there is Adria English. Unlike many others, Adria didn't rely on implication or innuendo. She didn't just talk, she filed a lawsuit. She accused Diddy of sexual coercion and abuse tied directly to yacht parties and elite events, alleging that women were recruited, pressured, drugged, and moved through powerful spaces like inventory rather than people. Her claims weren't framed as chaos or isolated misconduct. They were structured, methodical, organizational. She described patterns that mirrored what Cassie had already placed on record: power dynamics enforced through fear, access controlled by money, silence maintained through leverage. That alignment is what made people stop scrolling. Because when multiple accounts begin to echo the same architecture, it no longer looks random. And that brings everything back to the core question the streets keep asking, the one no press release can fully neutralize. If all of these women were close, if they were inside, seeing different angles of the same machine, who knew what? who stayed quiet because silence was safer than truth, who complied to survive, because the streets don't believe this was ever a one-man operation. They believe it was a system built slowly over decades. A system protected by silence, reinforced by power, sustained by proximity, and shielded by people who understood that speaking came at a cost. And now, as the walls allegedly begin to crack and whispers of new tapes circulate in the background, attention has shifted. People aren't just watching Diddy anymore. They're watching everyone who stood close enough to know better. So the question turns outward toward the audience, toward the culture watching in real time. Were these women victims? Were some of them accomplices? Or were they survivors doing whatever it took to stay alive in an industry that punishes vulnerability and rewards silence? And if more names start getting called, if more doors open, who do you think the spotlight lands on next? Drop your thoughts in the comments, subscribe to Mike Tripp, and click on the next video. I'll see you in the next one. So now I want to hear from you. Were these women victims, accomplices, or survivors doing whatever it took to stay alive in a dangerous industry that punishes vulnerability and rewards silence? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them all. Subscribe to Mike Tripp so you don't miss what comes next. And click the next video, because this story isn't over, and the next chapter might be the one that changes everything.